how much more effective would our lives be if we were just dealing with what's happening, even though sometimes the situation is not what we prefer, but yet it still needs to be dealt with? And how much more difficult is it to deal with when you're all emotional about it, which is to be emotionally disturbed? And this is so interesting because this really speaks to the real dilemma of being human, to be bothered all the time by what appears to be going on. On my heart and mind today, there's this topic of Stoicism, and I want to take a look at not just Stoicism, but to bring a profound simplicity to what we might call the promise of Stoicism, and see how it's the same promise as spirituality in general, which will also bring just a profound simplicity to our experience of being human. And it's not to say that I'm an expert on the topic of Stoicism, but at the core of what Stoicism points towards, in many ways we can call it the undisturbed life. To go through this life and at least be a lot less bothered with what appears to be happening. And if that is the result, or if that is the promise, I see that that's the same promise of spirituality in its most original invitation. And this is fun to look at because when we explore what we might call the root dilemma of being human, and one way it could be said that we're just so damn bothered by everything, to the point where as we walk through this life, it seems like a dangerous playground where there are potential enemies everywhere. You walk around with a bit of defensiveness, worried about what's going to happen. And I guess, in a way, Stoicism invites you to focus on what you can control and let go of what you cannot control. At least, in part, that's how it's communicated, but I don't really think that's the underlying invitation. More accurately, and in alignment with real spirituality, I would say it's your capacity to discern the difference between what is actually happening and what you imagine to be happening, and you rely more on what's actually happening than on the imagination. You know the difference. And it's interesting to me because we might not initially think that that's the invitation of spirituality. I guess traditionally, the overarching theme of spirituality can be quite mystical, or might we say lofty. But can we look at this simplicity for a moment? By at least acknowledging the end result that we're looking for in spirituality? And can we see that in some way it's to be less bothered? Maybe it's to feel more like a sovereign human being that is more in control of your experience. And I find that to be such an interesting word, control, because I don't really think it's that. In many ways, it's the great release of needing to control that which is beyond your control. And so if we say the goal is control, I think it just adds an unnecessary tension. So much so that this isn't about controlling yourself, as it is about that discernment. What's really going on here? Because as you see what's really going on, there is a great release of needing to control. And if we ask the question, why do I even want control? In some way, the answer is, I want to be at peace. And if that's the real goal here, to be at peace, the goal is not control, because I want control to be at peace, then let's look at the nature of peace. What is peace? What is it to be at peace? And in some way, we might say it's to be unbothered. And then we can ask, well, what are we bothered by? And that's fascinating, because in one way, we might create a huge list of all of the things that happen in life that we're bothered by. And what's interesting is the more that you investigate these things, you see that the thing that you're really bothered by is what happens in the mind. Do we need to unravel that, or can we just jump to that conclusion? Like, if something happens on the surface, are you really bothered by what's happening on the surface? Or are you bothered by the mind's interpretation? Is that not obvious? Does that seem like a leap? And if you think you found something on the surface that you're bothered by, and you go, oh no, but there's this and this and this and this, what is that other than your thoughts about it? Can you actually be bothered by anything that's happening in life? Or are you only bothered by what goes on in the mind? Put it this way, if you were completely unconscious, the mind wasn't active, could you be bothered? No. So this is an interesting reframe, because if we can see that to be bothered is only in the mind, then in many ways, at least for a moment, we can let go of the world and ask ourselves, okay, well, what is it going on in the mind that makes me so bothered? And in many ways, this is the pathway to Stoicism, to be unbothered, by looking at the truth of things. What's really going on? And the more you look, the more you will see that which bothers you, you don't need to be bothered by, because it's not even that. Which is to say, if something happens on the surface and you're bothered, you can immediately recognize that you're not really bothered by that thing. You're bothered by something going on in the mind. And so in essence, using spiritual language, this is a forgiveness for what's happening on the surface, because you see that it's not effectively responsible for you being bothered. Do you see how that would play out? That element of forgiveness? Because the disturbance, to be bothered, says it is that something out there that is at fault for me being bothered. And the moment I recognize it's not really that thing, then I can't blame it anymore, which is forgiveness. And this is so interesting, because this really speaks to the real dilemma of being human, to be bothered all the time by what appears to be going on. And of course, in this investigation, the mind wants to always go to the extremes. What about this? And what about this? And what about this? Much of which isn't even your experience. It's your imagination about somebody else's experience, which is not something you can find the truth of, because you're just looking at your projection about somebody else's experience. And so if you want to see the truth of this, you have to look at your own direct experience. What happens inside of you, whether it was something that was, whether it's something that is currently happening, or something that you fear happening in the future. Even to look at the example of, what if somebody punches me in the face? Is that to say I'm not bothered by somebody punching me in the face? And honestly, no. I'm bothered by my interpretation. And again, what is it to be bothered? It's to be emotionally disturbed. And it's so interesting that we associate emotional disturbance with what we'll call physical disturbance. They are not the same thing. You can be physically disturbed, meaning you can burn yourself on a hot stove, and it cannot bother you internally. It could not reflect some experience of suffering, emotional disturbance. In effect, it's not a big deal. It's like, oh, okay, that happened. What do I need to do about it? Well, let's get some ice. Okay, life goes on. No big deal. Do you see this? Whereas you could get punched in the face and not be emotionally bothered, where it's like, okay, I just need to deal with this now. You know what's interesting? Look at this through the lens of any form of martial arts, where the more emotional you are engaged in some sort of self-defense or physical conflict, the more emotionally invested you are, the more dumb your response is. Do you see that? When we react emotionally, which is to react from being emotionally disturbed, we're not thinking clearly, we're not present, we're not dealing with the situation at hand. We're dealing with our emotions. And in many ways, the practice of martial arts, again, not that I'm an expert, but what I see is the ability to be focused and deal with what's actually happening, and to not be emotionally disturbed, which in another way is to say not to take it personally, to just deal with what's happening. And how much does this speak to our everyday lives? How much more effective would our lives be if we were just dealing with what's happening, even though sometimes the situation is not what we prefer, but yet it still needs to be dealt with? And how much more difficult is it to deal with when you're all emotional about it, which is to be emotionally disturbed? And furthermore, there are degrees of this. Sure, you can, in a very minor way, take something personally and still deal with it. But look at the principle at what I'm saying. The more emotionally disturbed you are, the more difficult it is to deal with. And so I'm not implying that there should be a 100% absence of emotional disturbance. That's to take it to a ridiculous extreme, which is to avoid the principle in what I'm saying, which is to hide from the truth of what I'm saying. And so effectively, what we are talking about is being less disturbed by seeing reality more clearly, because the more you see the truth of reality, what you essentially see is that nothing is personal. And taking things personally is the root of being emotionally disturbed, which makes it very difficult to address reality because you're distorting reality. And then you're trying to deal with the disturbance, which is like dealing with an illusion that's not actually happening, which in many ways complicates the human experience. It's an interesting inquiry to just be radically honest with yourself by looking at your direct experience. Look at last week, the past 7 days. There are definitely examples of being emotionally disturbed, and ask yourself honestly, what was I bothered by? Can you really tell me that it wasn't you taking something personally that wasn't really personal? And I love how on the surface we can come up with examples, but the more you look at those examples, it's like, oh shit, I see that. I took it personally. Which is also like saying I turned it into something that it wasn't. And you see, this is the essence of spirituality, which is getting in touch with reality. Getting in touch with what's actually happening and getting out of your mind, which is imagining something that's happening that's not really happening. And the more you do this, the less disturbed you'll be, which is also to say it heals suffering. Isn't that profoundly simple? Sometimes I wonder, and I guess it's going to be different for everyone that's listening, but there's a beautiful simplicity to this, which invites a radical and immediate stillness. What's really going on here? And when you ask that question, maybe even with your eyes closed, you can see that your mind is imagining a life that isn't really happening. Your mind is imagining a self that's not a real self, that is seen as less than, that is seen as unworthy of love, that is seen as missing something that's vital to your worth and well-being. And then the more you get in touch with reality, what is actually here, beyond your thinking, beyond your stories, you recognize a wholeness, which is effectively saying nothing's missing. Which is also like saying there's nothing to judge. There's no appropriate reason for withholding love, even if someone's punching you in the face. And of course, as it relates to no appropriate reason for withholding love, we might have to examine, well, what is love really? Because we have our imagination of love, which means, oh, I would have to be nice to them. No. That's a conditional love. That's a form of love. Love can be expressed in many different ways. Which also speaks to the dilemma of why this seems complicated, because as it relates to things like compassion or forgiveness or kindness or yada, 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 we have our ideas of these things, a particular form, and we think they are the form, which is kind of like saying they can only be expressed one way. And that's not true. You know what? Let's illustrate it this way as it relates to love. If someone's being unkind to me, if someone's being violent to me, do you notice how if you take it personally, you see them in a very negative light? You see them with eyes of judgment. You see them as against you. Maybe you see them as evil. Now, imagine you don't take it personally, and rather you're deeply curious. What's really going on here? Beyond what my mind says that it's personal and it means I'm less than, yada, yada. What's really going on here? And let me fast forward to the conclusion, which is if somebody is acting out violently, they're hurting deeply on the inside. They're confused. They think they're undeserving of love. Which is also to say, if somebody is expressing violence on the outside, it is a reflection of the violence that's happening on the inside. Furthermore, their violence towards me isn't really about me. It's just being expressed from within their experience. And I can interpret it in 1,000 different ways. I can give it meaning, which is it's about me, and it's not. But when you see what's really happening here, you see another human being who is hurt, who is confused, who is effectively disconnected from the truth of what they are, and understandably, given their conditioning and their journey, it would make sense that they think that. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Which creates a completely different interaction with that human being. It creates a completely different life that is perceived. Now, granted, imagine you take it personally, you're emotionally disturbed. Do you see the life that creates where you ultimately just end up fueling their violence by returning violence for violence? Do you see this? You add confusion to confusion, which multiplies confusion. Isn't that interesting? Multiplies disturbance. Don't we see this in relationships all the time? Right? One person in the relationship says some hurtful things. The other person takes it personally, responds with some hurtful things. And then there's a ping pong battle of exchanging insults. All the while, what's actually happening isn't being seen, which is where the real healing is. Like, imagine your relationship partner comes to you with some hurtful insults, and you see that it's not really about you, but it's an expression of what's going on inside of them. And it's like, oh, I see you're hurting right now. Gosh, I'm sorry. Do you see how that sets the stage for a completely different experience? Which really speaks to the life we are creating. In one way, we think that a disturbance-fueled life or relationship is just the way of things. We think, oh, this is just life. That's how it is. No, it's not. It is a life in response to an innocent misunderstanding about what's really happening. And the closer you get to seeing what's really happening, the more healing there is. And part of that healing, to point back to Stoicism, is to be less bothered by what's happening, which means you can be more present for what's really happening and deal with what's really happening. Whereas if there's conflict, it can actually be resolved and it doesn't have to spin out of control. And it's not to say that there's no conflict at all. Rather, maybe more accurate, it's to say there's no conflict with conflict. Or even if you're disturbed, you're not disturbed by being disturbed. If there's conflict, it means there's an invitation to see something profound. There's an invitation for love to flow. Same with if you're disturbed, it's not a problem. You don't have to be bothered by being bothered. Rather, you can just be honest about it, which is also a form of radical self-responsibility, and not projecting it onto another human being that says, oh, it's your fault I'm bothered. I understand it might look that way, and that's what we do as human beings, but it doesn't mean it's based on what's actually happening. And what a beautiful doorway for relationship healing, to have that flavor of accountability, which says, I'm bothered right now, and in many ways, it's my own creation. Can we have a conversation about it? Because again, it's okay that you're bothered. And I guess that really points to the hang-up, because as we talk about these things, it's so easy to assume, oh, it's all an illusion. I'm not really bothered by anything. Okay, I'm not allowed to be bothered now, which means I'm just going to pretend to be stoic. I'm just going to pretend to be spiritual. Good luck with that. That's not the pointing. And again, that's always what happens with these sort of modalities or spiritual traditions. We just end up pretending to be the thing, rather than opening ourselves up to the real message, which in many ways is a doorway into a radical vulnerability, which is the thing that we're trying to avoid, a radical self-honesty. Which is adorably funny. And so what's the real pathway into this? Like if we say, okay, I see how this is true. I see how I'm super confused. I see how I project meaning that's not really there. I see how I take things personally. I see how I'm lost in the illusion of my mind. What's the pathway to healing? And again, there can be 1,000 different questions. What about this? And what about this? And what about this? And in one way, I want to say it's not so much about all of those questions, because we're trying to tackle 10,000 different problems when it's all just one very specific problem. You know what it's also like as an illustration? If you look at the nature of relationships, and I'm going to fast forward to the conclusion here. I've given many talks on the nature of this. But in conclusion, it's like, in reality, there's only one relationship. And that's the relationship you have with yourself. But we have all of these reflections of relationships, these mirrors of relationships. But they all point back to the relationship you have with yourself. And so, in essence, we can look at the surface and say, but how do I deal with the relationship with my boss? What about my parents? What about my partner? What about my kids? What about the tax man? What about yada, yada, yada? You see this. You have 10,000 problems amidst 10,000 relationships, but they are all exposing the conflict you have with your self-relationship. And so if you heal the relationship you have with yourself, by default, it starts to touch all of your other relationships. And furthermore, we want to avoid the real relationship and stay on the surface and try and fix all of these external relationships so that we can avoid the real relationship, because that's the scary part. That's where it gets real. And so it's kind of like asking, amidst these 10,000 problems on the surface, what is it within me that makes them all possible? Rather than going on the surface and trying to figure them out one by one. So the pathway to this is actually quite simple, but also a bit difficult to put into words. You know what? We can look at it this way as it relates to the spiritual invitation. What's the pathway? And in essence, it's this. It's a radical self-honesty combined with a courage to honor the honesty, which is also like saying a courage to honor the truth. Do you see this? The spiritual path, getting in touch with what's true, and then letting that truth replace the lie. Living that truth, letting that truth move through you, which is also to give up all of the illusions and to let the truth be the truth. Do you see how scary that might be? Why would one even do that? Because as you investigate the truth, you see it's the only way. There's a lot of different ways you can imagine, which is all trying to avoid the truth, which are all ways that are trying to protect our illusions, which in some ways is to avoid the raw reality of our humanity, to avoid our own vulnerability, and protect the thing that helps us hide, which effectively is like a strategy that says, help me keep blaming. Help me protect my illusions, which is funny. I wrote this thing a long time ago called the confused prayer. And effectively, the confused prayer says, Dear God, help me put my illusion back together. Dear God, help me avoid seeing what I'm afraid of. Dear God, help me hide from my insecurities. Dear God, please make other people how I want them to be so that I can avoid my own bullshit. And of course, that's the more direct and honest thing we are saying, masked by a bunch of flowery statements. And what's the most sincere prayer? Dear God, help me see what's true. Dear God, help me honor what's true. Dear God, help me get out of my own way so that the truth can be the truth. That's not popular. Who wants that? Right? Because what do we want as human beings? We want what we want in the world. We want people to like us. We want to feel special. We want to be better than others. We want to prove people wrong. We want to be right. We want to protect our imaginary sense of a separate self-importance. Do you see this? We don't really want the truth. On the surface anyway, or you could say the ego doesn't really want the truth. The ego is terrified of the truth. The truth is death for the ego. What brings someone to this space is you see that the truth is the only way. It's your salvation. The truth is what heals the conflict. The truth is what heals the emotional disturbance. And we've tried 1,000 other ways to get around it. Which is why it's also wise to say, if you think there's another way around it, go try. Find out for yourself. Which is why a lot of people end up on a spiritual path, is because they've exhausted themselves in the world and they realize it's not working. Everything I'm chasing slips through my fingers. Why? Because what you're chasing is an illusion. The thing you think you want so badly isn't a real thing. And you think it's going to give you something. You think it's going to rescue you. You think it's going to be your salvation. But what is it? It's a product of your imagination, which is to say it's not real. And something in you craves what is real. And what is this thing that is real other than the thing that we will call the truth? And the truth, effectively, and to tell a story using words, destroys all of your illusions. And so the pathway, we could say it's surrender, which is fine, but someone only surrenders because they see there isn't a way out. Which is why this investigation is so important, which is why it's important for me to just keep repeating myself through 1,000 different stories so that we can see it from every angle, that the only thing you actually want in this life is the truth of life. To explore how this is an illusion or how that is an illusion, and then go test it out. So you see in your direct experience. And the more you see it, the more it humbles your heart. The more you start forgiving everything and everyone. The more you take a radical responsibility to see that in some way, you are the sole creator of the hell you are experiencing because you are living in opposition to the truth of things. Which is also like saying you're taking things personally that aren't really personal. You're trying to make it about you, and it's not about you. Do you see that this is what we're effectively doing as human beings? Where in some way or another, you're trying to make it about you. When someone doesn't do what you want and you get your feelings hurt, you're making it about you. When life doesn't go how you think it should go and it hurts emotionally, you're making it about you. Every emotional disturbance is in response to interpreting an experience or a circumstance in a way that says it's about you. And this is simply the ego trying to survive. For the ego to survive, it has to take things personally. It has to be caught in a continual quest of telling stories about itself to keep it alive. Which is why it's so determined to always take things personally. This is about me. This is about me. This is about me. Is it? Be still. Is it really about you? Or are you just imagining that into existence as you find yourself completely disconnected from reality, which is what it's really about? And the more you see what it's really about, the only pathway is the surrendering of the ego. Which is a deep humility. which is the great laying down of an imaginary sense of self-importance, which is also to recognize that you are not in this life in service to yourself, which is your self-important idea. You are here in life in service to life, which could also be seen as in service to others. It's not about you, it's about the totality of life, which in a spiritual or religious way of speaking, it's about God. You are here to be in service to God, which is so wild how we can have all of our dogmatic ideas about that and be offended by the statement. And I say that because I was at one point. What do you mean I'm here to be in service to God? That's dumb. This is my life. As I'm speaking about a life of this imaginary character that I think I am that doesn't really exist, that feels terribly insecure and is secretly trying to be better than other people, secretly trying to make this whole life thing about me. How's that going? It's terrible. It's exhausting. Constantly disturbed by everything because it's not doing what I want it to do, which is kind of like saying it's me trying to be God and creating hell in the process, which is the story of the devil. An angel in heaven hanging out where there is this celebration where all the angels are worshiping God. And this angel says, hey, but what about me? I want to be worshiped. And so he leaves heaven and says, I'm going to make this about me. I want other people to worship me, and creates hell. Because he didn't see the bigger picture. He didn't see how all this works. And this illustration of the devil is simply pointing to the ego. And the word ego is to just tell another story about this innocent misunderstanding that we have as human beings, which confuses the mind's imagination for reality. Do you see that? All of these words, all of these stories, they're just pointers. And again, so wild how we look at these pointers and we create a reality to them that's not really there, which is we start to believe there is a real devil character with horns underneath the ground in a fiery pit. Oh, that's real. That's really happening. No, it's an illustration. And it can be a powerful illustration. But you could also get lost in the illustration and start thinking it's real. In one way, the extreme illustration of that, just like the extreme illustration of heaven, where the streets are paved in gold and everyone gets their own mansion, the extreme illustration points towards the importance of it or the magnitude of it, which says pay attention. Right? It's like we have to tell these extreme stories to get your attention so that you can see the real thing, but we just get lost in the story. And we start taking it literally, where it's like, okay, after I die, I'm going to get my own mansion. And the streets are going to be paved in gold. No, you're missing the point. And even everything I'm saying, it's just another story. I'm using these clumsy things we call words that don't actually define anything at all, in an attempt to point to something that your mind cannot see, which is just an invitation to get still and radically honest with yourself. What's really going on here? And it's not so much something to think about, even though thinking about it can be helpful, but it's something to see in the depth of your heart, which inspires what I call a holy shit moment. Which induces a profound humility that says, I'm sorry to everyone and everything. I was making this about me. I didn't see the heart of the matter, which is also like saying I didn't see my own heart. I was too busy judging myself. just like I was too busy judging others. Gosh, there's so much to explore. This points to where I want to say your real power is, but that's a statement that could just energize your ego, because it's such a humble power. A humble power where I would say that it's not so much my or Tiger's power, it's God's power flowing through me, which again could energize the ego, but it's in everything and everyone. And it's such a fascinating thing to walk through this life with what we might call the eyes of God, which effectively is to be unbothered by what's happening and to only see love, which is what we might also call heaven, which is also the second coming of Christ, if we want to look at that story. Isn't it beautiful to see or realize or understand that you as a human being have the capacity to stand up and forgive the whole world? In many ways, and again, I'm saying this lightly as a pointer, you are the salvation for the whole world through the sacrifice of your ego, essentially, where you can extend unconditional love to all of creation and say, I love you. Do you see how that transforms the world you're living in? Do you see that the world you're living in is the only world? There is no other world, because you might say, oh, but what about my neighbor's world? That's in your world. What you think is your neighbor's world is in your world. It's all contained within the one consciousness that you are, all of it. There is no other world outside your world. Therefore, you are the salvation for the entire world. You can heal the entire world. Which again, dramatically transforms everything you see, which in some way, as I said earlier, you end the conflict with conflict. Do you see this? It's like, let's look at a very simple example. Say that you have a friend that's in a relationship and you're friends with both people, and you see that they're in conflict. Now, look at this. You could perceive that as a huge problem. Like, oh no, they're in conflict, which creates a particular world. Or you can see that the conflict is a beautiful opportunity for love to emerge. It's the perfect lesson that's unfolding for their particular journey. It's necessary. If it's happening, it needs to happen for the sake of love being love. Do you see how that's a completely different world? Meaning, conflict can happen, but you don't have to be in conflict with the conflict. Which, in another manner of speaking, we can say it's to be at peace with the war, rather than being at war with the war. As such, you can look at the whole world and be at peace with the world, which is the same as going into the forest and seeing all manner of chaos, but being at peace with the totality of the forest. Because you understand that whatever is happening inside the forest needs to happen for the forest to be the forest. It doesn't have to be how you think it should be. It needs to be what it is in order for it to be what it is. And in this recognition, you have healed the forest because you put it back where it's supposed to be which is exactly what it is rather than your imagination about what it should be. You have embraced reality. This is so profound. It's so profound, and it's so utterly transformative for the totality of your human experience. Everything, your entire world. Which speaks to why spirituality has been at the crux of humanity since the beginning. And forever will be, in some form or another. And there will always be some fool like myself attempting to put this into words. Many different people talking about it with many different stories. And then the people who talk about it could fall into the same trap of thinking that their words are the right words and everyone else is wrong. And it's all so beautifully playful, which really points back to maybe an ultimate form of Stoicism, which is not so much to remain unbothered, but it's to see the playful beauty in all that is happening, which in many ways is truly living from your heart. A heart that is in devotional service to what's really true. Thank you for hanging out with me.